Welcome to Newrealities. My name is Alan Steinfeld, and on this show I like to investigate the nature of consciousness, how we perceive the world. Today's guest is Emilie Conrad, and she's developed something called Continuum, which is a new way of looking at the body and how we are basically movement. Thank you, Emilie, for coming. Continuum. The basic understanding, as I see it, is that everything is in a flow. Everything is not static. I mean, even the planet itself appears to be still, but we're moving at hundreds of thousand miles a second. Now, how did you relate that to the body, this idea of movement?
You know, the physicists have said for years that we live in a world of movement, and even though they've created a theory about it, there's no experiential interface. So in my understanding of movement, I've been going into the, well, I'll have to sort of make this picture for you, that the human system being composed mostly of water. Wave motion is an essential biological movement for human beings. But the wave motion is very subtle. It's not hula dancing, although that is a form of wave motion, or belly dancing is a form of wave motion, or sometimes we see in primitive movement, we see wave motion, but the kinds of wave motion that I've been exploring are more intrinsic. And when you begin to go into the more intrinsic, meaning more internal movements, you don't find solidity.
You mean cellular, or?
Yeah, cellular, and the fluid system, and the fluid wave, so that in a sense you could say that a human being is composed of many different kinds of movements that appear to coalesce in order to function. So that in a sense we stop the world in order to function, meaning that in order to function, all of these movements need to coalesce in order for you to be able to grab, in order for you to be able to stand, in order for you to live in this electromagnetic field called Earth. You have to be able to muscle up and be able to function, to fetch wood, carry water, as I call it. But you know, if you look at the astronauts that go into outer space, they're in a completely different environment, and so their bodies decalcify. They go through all kinds of changes within their physical form because the electromagnetic field of the moon or of outer space is completely different. So for us to be able to function in this field called Earth, our bodies at the functional level need to appear to solidify, meaning that we don't relate to ourselves as waves and frequencies, we relate to ourselves more or less as solid form.
Is it kind of what the quantum physicists say about light being a particle and a wave? Do you get sort of that?
Yeah.
The appearance is solid, but yet we're moving.
At a functional level, we appear to be solid, meaning for you to fetch wood, carry water, do functional things that expedite, there is a coalescing or an apparent localizing, so that you don't even know you're doing this. I mean, you're not doing it at a conscious level. It just happens. But the process of the body is not bound by anything. So the process at the cellular level and the level of fluids is constantly interacting with the planet and being informed by the planet. So that the notion of a bounded body is only true at the level of expediting function. In other words, ordinary conventional thinking, would say that this is what your body is, but the process of the body is not bound.
When you mean process, you mean the electromagnetic field?
I'm meaning that the exchange is taking place. The organism is constantly exchanging with the environment. It's constantly interacting with the environment. And to the degree that that interaction can be participated with would be the scope of intelligent life that system is living in. So if I live in a narrow band of forward, back, up, down, I've limited the parameters of my own existence. So as I have a broader scope of the kind of interactions taking place at an experiential level, not at a theoretical level, but at an experiential level, the vastness of my system is now reflected in what is available to me.
So you kind of go beyond the conditioning of the mind where we were taught we were this limited being, and you help people in your process kind of expand their consciousness beyond what the appearance is? Is that part of your work?
Yes. So, but there's an important thing to understand that in these last years, particularly in Western culture, we have what I call the industrialization of the nervous system. We have become overtaken by the Industrial Revolution, and so that we relate to ourselves more at a mechanical level than we do at a biological level. We don't have much sense of ourselves in terms of our own biological functioning. So we are, and one of my pet peeves is, of course, is the fitness community and the mechanical movement that's used in strengthening bodies. It's very interesting that if a Aborigine came to a gym, they would think that we have absolutely lost our mind. Because to them, those movements make no sense, because there's no biological connection to those movements.
And there's no functionality, there's no reason to do it in a practical sense.
Well, there is, in a very limited sense, there is. It does strengthen, but what it also does is it dissociates, but it creates a mechanical overlay in which it keeps reinforcing the mechanical view that has particularly invaded Western culture over these years, and particularly in our time with the soundbite video fast food culture, where we've lost language.
Yeah.
If you look at the kind of language that people wrote 100 years ago, people aren't even capable, hardly, very few writers are capable of that level of linguistic capacity.
Yeah, you work with dancers mostly?
No, I work with regular people. No.
Well, how do you help people expand out of this Western mechanistic view into a fully embody their physicality, really?
Well, most people, starting in the 60s, there was this big humanistic movement where people began to explore the parameters of their own existence. And up until the 60s, that didn't, there were people that went into spiritual practices, but not so much the alternative lifestyle, health.
Holistic, that we're organisms, not machines.
Yeah.
That's basically it. So how do you apply that to movement in the body in your work?
The primary thing is that we're basically fluid systems that are learning to live on land. The human body, as I see it, is aquatic in its origin, and it becomes terrestrial. And the fluid system is our primary system.
I see.
And in that fluidity, it creates in the heightening of fluid movement, it puts you into a deeper relationship with your system as a biological process. And in becoming more heightened as a biological process, it puts you more in connection to the planet, because there's no separation between the biological process of a human being and the relationship of the planet. The thing that's interesting about fluid systems is that they resonate. So they don't need any time or space. And so that when you have a room, let's say, of people who are heightening their fluid system, they create one body. So if you have a room of 80 people, they create one body of 80 people. If you have 20 people, one body. If you have 3 or 4 people, one body. But the fluid system also resonates with all other fluid systems. So the fluid of the planet, the ocean, all of the fluids of the planet, and the fluid inside the planet are also part of this. This is a kind of an umbilical cord that human beings have in relation to their planet. And the planet informs us through the fluid system, so that there is an astounding connection that earlier societies did have, and we have lost. I mean, even in our time, the whole Gaia theory, which is, some big revelation that the Earth is alive. I mean, up until fairly recently in Western culture, we had no understanding that the Earth was alive, and that it was a process, and that process was in direct resonance with human beings. We're constantly relating, and we're being informed by our planet. The invasion of what I call the invasion of the body snatchers, which is the mechanical world, actually deflects that relationship. That's what's so interesting, and under the guise of physical fitness, that mechanical movement is so exaggerated because we already live in a highly mechanized society, so that when you keep reinforcing mechanical movement, you're actually reinforcing a separation from the profound resonance of a fluid system that is not sequential in its orientation.
Well, I always thought it was strange or interesting that we were, what, 70, 80% water?
87.
And so is the planet, so is
Yes.
the Earth. So there's that just understanding and relationship. But when you say we're informed by the planet, do you mean in a biological way, not in some kind of intellectual or conscious way?
In a sense that the more when we're able to participate with ourselves at the level of fluidity, the movement is information, for one thing. So when we start to feel very subtle movements, it's also informing us. Now, it's not informing us at an intellectual level, but it is informing us at a organismic level. So the organism begins to be awakened in a certain way, and it begins to have a certain rapport.
And we sense something. There's a sense. It might not be an intellectual sense. So what's like just a little example of how we can tap into that?
I think the easiest way to activate the fluid system, as far as I know, is through the use of breath. There are different ways of breathing that will activate the fluid system, and it will make it more apparent, so that it creates more stimulation. There are certain breaths that are somewhat percussive that will do that. So it kind of gets the fluid system activated, and you can start to feel it. It's as if it magnifies it, it heightens it.
You start to feel the subtlety of your body moving.
You can feel movement from inside. You should know that all of the intrinsic organs, all of the intrinsic movements of the body are still oceanic in their ancestry. So they still represent the first world, which is the ocean.
Well, even the cranial sacral discoveries that the bones themselves are moving.
Right.
That's oceanic, you're saying,
Right.
and connected to the ocean still.
Right, and you know, in cranial therapy, they don't know where the first cranial rhythm comes from. And I have said, I do a lot of work with cranial therapists, and I've said that it is the rapport of the human system at the level of fluids with the fluid of the planet that is where that original pulse is coming from. That's my theory.
What I've read is that we evolved in a semi-aquatic environment.
Yes.
We were maybe had our heads out of the water, but we were immersed in water as a culture.
We follow the same, in utero, you follow the same pattern as the planet in terms of its development. So the first phases in embryogenesis, you're biomorphic. You include all life form. And part of Continuum is to bring that awareness into us that the human system includes all life form. So that when we go into the kinds of movement explorations that we do, the webs between the fingers become activated. There are vestigial parts of us that have developed over millions of years that are still part of the sculpture. I see it as a living anthropology.
Great.
That the whole system is able to participate at many levels of life process and not be bound by culture. My main concern, see, I see culture as very dissociative and very fragmented.
Well, this particular Western culture, there probably are cultures that have integrated the connection to the earth.
I think so. In earlier times, and we have some vestiges, the fact that the Aborigines are choosing not to reproduce is not good news.
Well, that's just that Marlo Morgan's theory,
Well,
right?
no, they are saying that they're not going to do it. But anyway, in Western culture, the perpetual fragmentation that takes place, to me, creates a human being that becomes even more dissociated from its own origins. That's why you can see that when they put that sonar into the ocean to find out something about oceanic climate, completely disregarding the fact that whales and dolphins and all the ocean creatures are dependent upon echolocation for their for their existence, and only a completely fragmented culture could do something like that. A culture that is completely separated from its environment. And so in the orchestration of I think that people come to Continuum as a way of realizing themselves more fully as what is human life on Earth. Is in a certain way, it's the search for terrestrial intelligence. And so the beginning of it has to be the connection between organism and environment.
Yeah. No, it's great. There's so many questions I want to ask you about, you know, the big picture and also the little picture. As far as the big understanding is the fact that, yeah, maybe you're right, that culture is just an aberration, like a distortion of a perception that we have of who we are in the world. So we develop a culture in order to put something between us and who we naturally are. Are you saying that?
I'm saying that, yes, I'm saying that particularly when it comes to the body.
Yeah.
You know, we've been hating the body for a very, very long time. And I kind of look to the Pagan period, that we're still recuperating from the Pagan period with this loathing toward having bodies. Even herbs are still considered a little suspect because they do come from the Pagan period. So anybody who is working with herbs is, you know, is a little bit.
But the pagans wanted to integrate us back into the body.
I'm just saying that we were horrified by the Pagan period, and so that
we were horrified from a Christian Western.
From the body, that the bodies were just completely orgiastic and all of those kinds of things, and so it created a kind of stringency around the human body where we have a very poor understanding of ourselves as living processes. We really do. I mean, even in the medical community, they learn from dead bodies. They don't, and the thing that's so amazing to me is that in understanding that we live in a world of movement, nobody really studies movement. They study the movement of stars, or they'll study the movement of atoms, but they don't study the movement of human beings. And if you study the movement of human beings, you can't study it from the level of muscle. You have to go into the fluid system and the cells if you want to understand what's taking place with human beings.
The fluid system being the blood circulation, the lymphatic,
cerebrospinal fluid, all of that. But as I say, the fluid system is primary, and so that the fluid system is what connects us to the planet.
So you work with people who have
all people,
but people who have had serious injuries, spinal cord, and all. And how do you start to connect them to a healing process, or not how, but what is it that you make them see about who they are that helps a healing?
Well, I just want to make it clear to you that there are thousands of people who are involved in Continuum, and of those thousands of people, some are in healing processes.
Right.
Because as a result of my exploring movement at these quintessential levels, I began to see that if the body is movement, then what is paralysis? And maybe paralysis is not what it appears to be. Maybe it's hypnosis. Maybe there are other things involved.
Right.
So as a special study, I began to work with people with spinal cord injury to see if we could activate new probabilities for movement entering into the fluid system and starting from there. Because if all life begins in fluid, then it would make sense that if I wanted to reconstitute new life processes, I would also return to heightening the fluid system.
Yeah.
So what happens with people who have spinal cord injury, if they're involved in Continuum, their spines begin to move like this. And in moving in this way, they begin, many new neural patterns are being stimulated. And so often what can happen is that the level of injury is progressively lowered. And so that somebody who starts out with a fairly high level of injury, as they begin to activate and through the fluid system, their spine begins to move in a more complex way, they're using new neural pathways. I never work at the level of the injury. I never work on the injury at all. I'm not trying to regenerate. What I see is the fluid system can innovate. It can actually bring about a whole new circuitry.
Well, all illnesses, if you want to call it arthritis then, or just injuries could be activated in the same way. I mean,
They are.
Yeah.
They are. But the most dramatic work has been with severe neuromuscular compromise because there are no protocols. In all of the treatment with spinal cord injury, there is no protocol for the spine.
Right.
Because they don't think the spine can do anything. So they think it's a waste of time to develop anything for the spine, which again is coming from the mechanical model. In other words, it's the model that becomes paralyzed, not the person. And then what I've done is I've developed repertoires for people to do, so that someone who has an injury is able to work with themselves.
Right.
So they're not constantly having to have someone else work with them, but they learn how to begin to access all of these modalities of movement within their own system. And in doing that, there's an empowerment that takes place in which they're not dependent, because most of the things that go on with people who are ill create dependency on other people to fix it for them.
Right.
And so. And I think that's fine, but I think that the fixer should be an adjunct and not the main event. The main event is the person being able to participate with themselves.
In their own process of...
really in their own healing odyssey, yes.
So what's so exciting is that you've actually taken a new way of looking at the body, and a new paradigm of actually seeing who we are on the planet and within ourselves. So if we are sort of the peak of this evolutionary process,
I didn't say that.
well, I thought I understood, because we've embodied all the creations that,
Oh yes, we
in that sense.
Yes,
maybe.
in that sense we are inclusive of all life form, but I question
maybe
whether
not
we're
the
at the
peak.
peak of our evolution. I think that Continuum exists because the culture itself has become so dissociated that it's almost necessary. To me, Continuum is very obvious. I don't have a particularly good feeling about where we're going. I really don't. I don't think. I don't. I mean, just when I look around, what I'm interested in, as long as I'm on this planet, what I'm interested in is a person who is able to be universal. And in being universal, our self-description cannot be a fortress. So that how I name myself, even male, female, however I name myself, particularly in the ethnic mode, that if any of my self-descriptions become fortresses, it concretizes my identity in a very particular way. And so you see the Bosnian effect, you see the Hutu effect, you see the Israeli Palestinian effect.
You see the male-female effect.
You see the male-female effect. So you see what I call the battle of the Titan identities. So the main thing, as far as I can see, what I would in my future would be where you see through the resonance with the planet, there is such a powerful identity that it doesn't need to displace itself in concretizing in ways that obfuscate the profundity of that motif.
Yeah, that is the highest in the sense you're saying. That connection is our true destiny.
It is what, as far as I can see, intelligent life on Earth. And in doing that, the ethnic fortresses are not so concretized, because, I have to tell you that as long as you're identified in the loop, there is no way out of the loop.
Right.
So that for me to function intelligently, I have to be able to be in a kind of high neutrality.
Well, do you know the work of Bruce Lipton?
Actually, I don't.
Oh, he's great. He says that the intelligence of the cell is in the receptor sites. It's in the membrane. And he says humans themselves are these receptor sites for the planet Earth.
That's right. That would be exactly the same thing, but it gets mediated by my excessive narcissism and my territorial blindness, my inability to accept other people, my exclusivity in all of the, so I see that and it's interesting that the mechanical movement actually increases exclusivity. It creates more limit. And so it creates more compartmentalizing. You compartmentalize movement. You start fragmenting movement so that my whole world becomes one state of fragmentation in which where am I supposed to be able to feel? Then I go lurching towards some spiritual practice that may be okay, but it still isn't connecting me to the earth, to the intelligence of the earth and the intelligence of all of the organic life that still lives in me. You know, the brain and the viscera are protozoan in their organization, so that you have these ancient entities that are living in us, very much surrounded by fluid. You have your tongue, which is very protozoan in its orchestration. So within the human being, you have all of these ancient forms.
Protozoan meaning?
Meaning filled mostly with water, early forms of life that were filled mostly with water, very primitive forms. So you see the brain is this wiggly thing filled with a lot of fluid, living in a lot of fluid. The same thing with the viscera, very wiggly, filled with a lot of fluid.
Connected by water, water being linked.
Right, but they're very protozoan in their shape. You have the dura mater that holds the cerebrospinal fluid, also very membranous, very fluid. So you have all of these very primitive forms. And see, that's my interest is the search for terrestrial intelligence.
That's great. I like that. That's great. Right. Forget about that. Let's just undo whatever conditioning we've had here and really become human in who we are as a biological, spiritual being. That's what I hear. That's great. That's a great, I mean, it's a lot to take in because the way you have developed this understanding is it's intellectual and biological.
Yes.
And you're too. Well, thanks for coming here and
thank you for having me.
And if people want to reach you,
310-453-4402.
My name's Alan Steinfeld. This has been Newrealities. I'm talking to Emilie Conrad, who's the founder of Continuum. And if you have any comments about the show for me or my guests, please call 212-473-6388. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you for watching, and see you next time.